So, Jack, we have quite an audience today, and we're very much looking forward to your wisdom and how we can unlock the secrets of extraordinary leaders.
Okay, thank you very much. We will launch right into this then, and let me begin by talking with you about how we came to this topic and how we chose this research project. I'm having a little bit of a problem kind of moving my slides on this screen here, so let's just kind of see what's happening. It's kind of locked up, so we'll see. It had been working earlier, so we'll ask for our technical assistance here to see if we can get things moving in the right way. Anyway, while we're doing that, let me just kind of tell the people on the line that the topic of inspiration is one that we became interested in a couple of 3 years ago as we began to continue the research that we'd done that's in the book The Extraordinary Leader. What we had done there was to analyze the competencies that separated the most highly performing leaders from others who weren't so highly performing. And we were able to kind of distinguish 16, we called them differentiating competencies. And very often people would come to us and they would say, so which of all these is the most important? If I were to choose one to work on, what should I choose? And so we began to kind of explore that possibility. And as we looked at a number of different ways of analyzing the data, we came to the fact that there was one attribute, one of these competencies, that just stood out from all the others, and it was the one that we've labeled inspiring and motivating people to high performance. What we found was that it was the one that was most highly correlated with people's level of commitment and engagement, the subordinates. It was the one that separated the top decile from the bottom decile of all leaders most powerfully. It was the one that separated the people at the top from the people at the middle most powerfully. And finally, it was the competency that was most powerful in when you ask people, what would you want your leader to be or do differently, it was the most frequently selected item. So from a variety of approaches at trying to analyze this question about what is the most powerful differentiating competency, inspires and motivates was the one that sort of came out consistently on top. So that's in a nutshell kind of the history of how we came to this topic. Let me just say that there certainly has been over the years, I think, a realization on the part of leadership students that, you know, we know many of the attributes of leadership, but there's always been this kind of mystery factor. What is there that just seems to be unique and different that separates the most effective leaders? We've often called that charisma. We've used that term, and we've talked about charismatic leaders, and there over the years has been a little bit of research done on this topic of charisma, and so it's been a fascinating kind of journey to try to explore, you know, what is the relationship of charisma to this topic of inspiration. So now we've got the slides working, and I think you can see in front of you the slide that says that we had researched some 20,000 leaders using some 200,000 assessments to arrive at our original 16 differentiating competencies. And I've talked to you a little bit about what those 16 competencies were, and you see them now in front of you here. And then we've talked about that one of them did stand out to kind of above all the others, the one that's called inspires and motivates to high performance. And so I've explained to you kind of how the four tests that we used in terms of the fact that this was the one that differentiated the most in terms of the people who were the top versus the worst. and also the top versus the average. And it also was the one that was the most highly correlated with levels of employee commitment. So we're all caught up now. That's how we got to this topic. Now, why were we surprised? I guess the thing that surprised us was it seemed to many of us that it was the softest of all the soft skills. And indeed, this notion of charisma had been very much kind of shrouded in a certain amount of mystery. Some people, were identified as being charismatic, but no one could quite define it. It was much like pornography. You kind of knew it when you saw it, but you couldn't really find any way to possibly describe it. It was not very clear that it had specific business consequences, and I think that was partly to the reason why it hadn't received a lot more research. And finally, there were some difficulties in trying to find, so how do you do much research on this when it's so difficult to define? And my colleague, Dr. Joe Folkman, had, I think, pioneered some unique and pretty creative ways to explore this topic of inspiration. So the business impact, I think, became very crucial to us. That as you looked in what literature was available, there were certainly some pretty convincing studies that said, yeah, it is the leaders who are inspiring who really do produce extraordinary results. And our own data kind of led us to that conclusion. Our own data said there are some very definable business outcomes. And I want to just take a minute or two and kind of share with you what some of those business outcomes might be. So first of all, here's a study that we did on the impact of inspiration and motivation, kind of broken out in quintiles. So there's the bottom 10%, then there's the 11th through the 35th percent, 36th through the 65th percent. And so we were able to kind of look at this from in clumps and say, and what's the impact of that increasingly higher level of inspiration and motivation on the overall satisfaction and commitment of the people that report to these leaders. And what you see there is, as you kind of move up that ladder, that increasingly higher levels of inspiration directly relate to higher levels of employee satisfaction and commitment. A second study we did was one certainly that deals with an important topic. There's a bunch of research about the importance of retention and how profitability in almost every organization goes up when they are able to retain people over a longer period of time. And as you ask people, to the degree that they have thought about quitting in the previous 6 months, you see that increasingly higher levels or higher scores on the dimension of inspires and motivates others to high performance, results in people not thinking about quitting, and a significantly lower percent of that occurring. A third study we did had to do with the ability of a leader to impact 3 other kind of outcomes, providing people with a clear purpose and sense of direction, helping them to realize that they do have the ability to change, and finally to feel that they are being effectively communicated with. As you see increasingly higher scores of inspiration and motivation, you see that these outcomes track very solidly with that. So we had some pretty substantive data that said, yeah, inspiration and motivation really does produce some discernible business outcomes. Now, you could ask the question, is this result unique to one culture? We were indeed able to compare our data from our North American studies with a number of other cultures. We have information from European countries, some Asia Pacific, some Middle East, and some Latin American countries. I won't show you all of them, but let me just show you a couple. Here's a data set from India, and as you see here, increasingly higher levels of inspiration and motivation. the impact it has on levels of satisfaction and commitment. You see that India very much parallels the North American data. Another study that we had done in the United Arab Emirates, again, the numbers vary just slightly, but you see basically the same pattern. So as far as we can tell, the research on this topic of inspiration and motivation seems to have almost a universal kind of worldwide consistency. So what are the implications? Inspiration obviously impacts a variety of outcomes. And the conclusion we came to was that even an average level of inspiration made quite a difference in the levels of customer satisfaction, the levels of employee commitment and engagement, people, the retention factors, and so clearly it made it worth further exploration. There are, I think, three big questions. And the three big questions are, number one, can anyone be inspirational, or is this reserved for a chosen few? Number two, exactly how does this thing work? What constitutes inspiration? And the third question is, why is it so powerful? And I'd like to spend the next few minutes addressing these three questions. And at least kind of share with you kind of what we have come to from our research. So the first question is, can anyone be inspirational? I would invite you for a moment just to sort of pause and think about a leader that you've worked with, someone that, from your perspective, really kind of lit your fire and with whom you kind of put forth your best efforts, and you were willing to work longer, harder, more conscientiously maybe than you did with other people for whom you've worked. And the obvious question, what did they do, as best you can discern, that made them so inspirational? And let me just invite you to kind of think about that as I will continue talking. But the big question, did they behave in some really unique way, or did they possess some supernatural ability that led them to do this? And we suspect that for the great majority of you, the answer to that question would be, no, they didn't have unique supernatural kinds of abilities. There have been those, by the way, some of the academic research that had been done maybe in the last 10 or 15 years, who would say that the charismatic leader was a person who was on a very noble mission, and they took unusual personal risks, and they were highly self-sacrificing, and they engaged in extremely unconventional behavior, and that they were remarkable in their ability to be attuned to the needs of their followers. Other academicians had a different set of conclusions. They just said charismatic people were determined, they were extremely more energetic, that they were more self-confident, they were more extroverted. But my conclusion from reviewing much of this research has been there's been almost zero agreement about what constitutes this thing called charisma. It's been the subject of a great deal of academic debate, but it's virtually kind of nothing's being done on it as far as I can see right now. So, is inspiration a gift? Are people kind of just born with it? Is it some natural ability that, much like some would attribute to the child prodigy? By the way, everything that I read about on the research around prodigies and the so-called expert performance question would say that there's no such thing. That what we've thought about as child prodigies were children who had an attentive adult who arranged for them to get good instruction and who really helped them in the discipline of practicing, and that virtually you can correlate the level so-called child prodigies with the number of hours that they practiced. So I don't happen to think that there are naturally endowed child prodigies, and I've certainly come to believe that there are, that this thing we call charisma is not something that was sort of a divine gift injected into a small number of people. Some would say, is inspiration and charisma just some tricks that people have learned? Are they better at pushing people? Are they better at pleading with people? Do they shame people? Are they good cheerleaders? You can see the list. I mean, are they good at these kind of devices? And let me sort of give you my own sort of conclusion, and based on the research that we've been able to do, the answer is no. We don't see any evidence to support the conclusion that they've simply learned some tricks that become viewed as remarkably inspirational behavior. So our conclusion to the first question, we're quite certain that nearly every leader can be inspirational to some degree. We think that maybe finding the answers to the second question, how does inspiration work, will help to answer the first question more convincingly. But we've taken a new approach to this question that we think may shed some light on this interesting kind of mystery. So, question number 2, how does inspiration really work? And by that I mean, so what are the components, what are the elements that make up inspiration? How do they get combined? And can they be acquired or learned, or again, are they endowed by some divine hand? Let me share with you then kind of how we approach this question. We analyzed the 360-degree feedback instruments from some 183,000 plus colleagues pertaining to about 14,000, nearly 500 leaders. And we determined those behaviors that were most highly correlated with those people who received the highest scores on inspires and motivates to high performance. So we found the people who got the very highest scores on that dimension, and then said, so what is it that these people appear to be doing that sets them apart? And we've concluded that there were, we'll call them 3 attributes and maybe 7 behaviors. And I'm going to kind of show those to you in just a moment, so don't be dismayed. We have referred to these things as competency companions, and let me be sure you understand this concept. It is simply this: a person who gets a very high score on those measures of inspires and motivates to high performance also obtain high scores on a handful of other attributes and behaviors, and a person who gets a low score on those same attributes and behaviors. And we have referred to these as competency companions. And that's very important that you kind of understand that we're talking about then strong correlations between these behaviors and people who score highly, as seen through the eyes of their direct reports and their peers and their manager, as being very inspiring and motivating. So what are those? And let me now tell you kind of what they are. The 3 that you see in green over on the left-hand side: role model, championing change, taking initiative, we've called kind of the attributes. They're not specific behaviors as we see them. I would probably describe these as attributes that describe a person's willingness to step in and accept the role of being the leader. They recognize that they are always on stage, that people are always watching what they do. They are the role model, like it or not. They have to be the one that's always driving for change. They have to be the one who is willing to kind of always have their foot on the gas and trying to take initiative. So those are the 3 that we've called kind of the attributes of inspiration. The one in blue is a unique one. the role of emotion in inspiration is really crucial. And everything that we were doing in terms of our analysis of data kept leading us back to the fact that there is an emotional component to inspiration that is kind of the driving force. And then we have a series of behaviors which start out with the leader's ability to work with his or her team in setting stretch goals, creating a very clear sense of vision and direction, being extremely effective as a communicator, being willing to be more innovative and take risks, seeing their responsibility for the development of the people that report to them, and finally to be a really effective team player and to be collaborative rather than competitive with their colleagues. These behaviors were the most highly correlated to this thing that we call inspiration. Let me just talk a little bit about this notion of the power of combining elements. Let me tell you about some other research that we did, which I think will explain the point I want to make. We looked at three elements. A person who was very effective, and by that I mean at the 75th percentile when it came to being analytical, kind of having strong kind of technical skills, or being focused on results, kind of driven for results, or being highly effective in terms of their interpersonal skills. If you find somebody who's at the 75th percentile on A, but not on B or C, there's a very low chance, very low percentage chance that they are going to be one of your top tier leaders. Same thing is true with if they're very good at being kind of focused on results, they're very driven, but they're not at the 75th percentile on A or C, what you see is also a very low likelihood of them being a top tier leader. And finally, the same thing applies to people skills. That if a person is not at the 75th percentile on technical analytical skills, not there on driving for results, but is there for people skills, yes, there's a small percentage chance that they will be one of your top tier leaders, but it's not very great. What's really dramatic is when you find somebody who is good at all three of those, you see then an extraordinarily high likelihood that they're going to be one of your top leaders in the organization. So this notion of combinations is one that we've got a fair amount of data about. So going back to the companion behaviors for inspires and motivates, it became very clear from our research that it is indeed the combination of these things that gives people a greater likelihood to be amongst the top tier leaders when it comes to inspiring and motivating inside their organization. I guess the metaphor that has kind of kept coming to me is, for those of you who have ever built a house or you've been involved at all in construction in the last many years, you're familiar with the notion of a laminated beam, which is a beam made up of kind of pieces of wood glued together, but the magic of them being glued together allows a beam that is roughly the same size as a steel beam to have equally the strength of a steel beam. So the process of combining these elements together and gluing them to each other gives them an enormous kind of strength. And I think that's what's happening with these elements that we were talking about. When you find someone who is willing to step up and take this role of the leader seriously and perform broadly in that responsibility, and you combine that then with somebody who is willing to use emotion in what he or she does as a leader, and then to practice a couple or three of these specific skills or behaviors, you see this very high likelihood of them being perceived as being extremely inspirational and motivational. Now, let me just say a word to all of you who have been through college statistics and who know that simply because things are correlated doesn't enable you to say, well, we know for a surety that A causes B. When things are correlated, A may cause B, B may cause A, or there may be something else that's causing them both. Having said that, let's just also recognize that much of research, especially the research in medicine and those areas, has come from discovering these strong correlations and then trying to figure out, so what's the reason for those things being correlated together? What better place to look for behaviors that would help people be more inspiring and more motivating than to find those things that are extremely correlated with it. So we believe that getting better at any one of these so-called companion behaviors has an extremely strong likelihood of helping you to be more inspiring. It's comforting to me as I look at what we've discovered in terms of these companion behaviors, that many of them were indeed what researchers a number of years ago had said were important elements of this thing that they called charisma. So let's see. So the second question, how does inspiration work? Let me just kind of summarize. We think inspirational leadership begins with a willingness of the leader to fully accept his or her role, that they accept the role that they are constantly a model for other people. They're on 24/7, like it or not. They are the ones who need to champion change with an attitude that supports change and supports continual improvement. And they indeed recognize their role in constantly initiating things. Secondly, they are willing to inject emotion in a variety of ways. First of all, they are really attuned to the fact that emotions are extremely contagious. We joke about the contagion of the flu bug or common colds or even E. coli. And it is indeed true that if someone comes into a room and sneezes, that germs travel very rapidly, and they travel, a number of feet in a matter of seconds. But we also all know that you can be in a room and have somebody come into it who is dour and negative and critical and punitive, and we've all seen the tenor of the meeting immediately change, and the contagion effect of emotions is one that just absolutely cannot be overstated. So the most effective leaders are people who recognize that if by increasing both the amplitude and the frequency of using emotion, and that may be expressing heartfelt appreciation to people for what they do. It could be passionately conveying the importance of a message that they're conveying. It could be sincerely asking others for added effort on some project that clearly needs that extra push. It can be their ability to tell compelling stories that really link to the emotions of the people involved. So in a variety of ways, these leaders understand the power of emotion. And finally, they recognize that even drama is important and appropriate, and that emotional process makes a stronger bond with their leaders. And so certainly the research about emotion is that it has a very kind of Velcroing effect in terms of linking people together. And the final kind of element then is that these very specific behaviors or actions that at first blush don't sound all that remarkable or that dramatic, are indeed very, very powerful tools that result in higher levels of emotion and motivation. And I'm not going to take time to talk in great detail about all these. We don't have time on today's webinar to do that. But let me just say a few words about a couple of them. I would first of all want you to look at that list and note these are all very positive behaviors. I'm not sure how many of you on the call today may be familiar with the work of a man named Martin Seligman, who has led a real revolution in the world of psychology around positive psychology. And there's a group at University of Michigan leading the charge on positive organizational psychology. But there's a growing body of evidence that just supports how important positive emotions are in terms of employee engagement, employee productivity, and which then translates into customer satisfaction and customer engagement. So let's just take a moment here and talk about some of these. Setting stretch goals, communicating vision and direction. I want to just say a word or two about maybe each one of those. Setting stretch goals. We've talked about goals for a long time, and obviously managing by objectives has been a very useful tool in the hands of managers for the last 40 or 50 years. Peter Drucker kind of really led the charge on that. What's really interesting is that there's something about a really dramatically powerful stretch goal. And I think, President John F. Kennedy's "we're going to send a man to the moon" is certainly a classic example of the power of setting an extremely stretch goal. And the research that we see in business is that when leaders really challenge their group, not just to take some baby steps, but challenge them to take something really bold and to set an extremely challenging goal, that people rise to the occasion. I heard the president of a publishing company talk recently, who said that it's a regional publishing company with that hadn't been on the New York Times bestseller list with any of their publications for a long time, and so they established as their goal that they were going to really crack into that very elite circle, and she was just standing back in amazement at what having that very lofty goal kind of did for the performance of the organization. So there's something magic about setting stretch goals, and it is the behavior that was most statistically significantly correlated with inspiration and motivation of all those behaviors. The second one is this whole notion of having a clear vision and direction, that there is something about a vivid, clear picture of where you're going that's, it's clear, it's compelling, it's concrete. You see the list there. That's very clear about what you as an organization won't be doing, which is as important as saying what you will be doing. But there's something extremely powerful about this notion of the leaders providing clear vision and direction. The third one would certainly no surprise. When you think about inspiration and motivation, I think most people would quite automatically think about good communication. But I think what this says to us who act in leadership roles is that we need to expand the volume and the frequency of our communication events. We need to be willing to kind of step into the big issues and not duck things that are really challenges. That there's an enormous amount of evidence that says when you engage in positive communication rather than negative communication, it has an extremely motivating effect. In fact, I was reading a book recently by a fellow named Kim Cameron from the University of Michigan talking about what is it that seems to be most correlated in terms of leadership behavior from their research on the impact it has on employee performance. And it was the ratio between positive comments the leader made and negative comments. And that if you looked at organizations that were underperforming, not doing well, and you listened to what their leaders were saying to them, tended to be negative. If you observed what the leaders were doing in the organizations who were getting the highest scores on performance and productivity, you observed that by a ratio of maybe 5 to 1, the comments that they were making were never critical, not trying to put pressure on people, but were expressing appreciation. They were uplifting. They were positive. So you see the rest of the list there. That we know that good communicators ask questions, that they're willing to kind of share the spotlight, that they see communication as a two-way street, that they're very good at telling relevant stories, and that they keep the pace brisk, and that they are very willing to inject their own personal kind of passion and enthusiasm into the process. So that's the third of these specific behaviors. Developing people was the next, and we've done a fair amount of research on the power of coaching. It is clear that when leaders take the time to not only talk with people about some performance issues, but sort of put their papers down and say, so Mary, how are you doing in your career? Are you making progress? Are you heading in the right direction? Or do you feel like you're in a position where you can further your long-term career aspirations? That willingness of the leader to spend time talking with people about their careers makes a huge difference. The leader who, when he or she delegates a project to somebody, says, Bill, I've going to give you this project because I believe you can get it done on time and on budget, but beyond that, I thought that this was something that would really help you develop the skills that you need for the next, your future. And so I've deliberately chosen this project, and I'm giving you this project because it's going to help you in your future. That's an inspiring and motivating act on this leader's part. I think when the leader stands back and says, so, what could we do to make your job more developmental? How could we restructure your job? How could we think about the components of your job, not just, again, what logically fits together and what maybe you can do, but what would help you to develop? And can we think about restructuring your job and giving it more breadth or more depth because it's going to be developmental for you? And then finally, of course, when the organization has developmental experiences available, whether they're company-sponsored workshops or seminars, or whether there's some externally available opportunities that the leader ensures that his or her subordinates get a chance to attend those. Those are all the things that really transmit this commitment to development and are very inspiring to the people that you work with. The next one is this notion of collaboration and being a good team player. We've all been in organizations where there was more competition between you and your sister division than there was between you and your major competitor. We've seen situations where organizations deliberately kind of pitted two groups against each other working on the same project to see who would get there first or with the best solution. And while that sounds very appealing to some people, the research is really clear that it's a terrible waste and very destructive, and that inspiring and motivating behavior is much more around building internal collaboration and cooperation than it is competition. And that when the leader kind of views teams as the fundamental building block of the organization and recognizes that it is teams that get major projects launched on time and on budget, and that it's teams that really create the highest levels of productivity, that's when you see, I think, the people really feeling energized in their work. And therefore, the most effective leaders, according to our research, were those who rewarded team effort and team accomplishment, who worked hard to kind of dismantle all the silos, who recognized that one of their jobs was to, when they saw competition and conflict arising, to step into it and get it resolved and get it put away. They were the ones who were seen by their subordinates as being most inspirational. And just involving people in the decision-making process, that cooperating and collaborating with people within your own group is a way of helping them to feel a much higher level of engagement. And the final skill, we think, is this one that's been referred to as fostering innovation. I've personally been very impressed to read the accounts of Jeffrey Immelt, the new CEO of General Electric. Took over following a very renowned CEO, Jack Welch, who had clearly done great things for GE, had put them on a course of being very operationally efficient and focused on being number one or number two in the markets that you were in. Immelt came in and said, seems to me the future is going to demand that we have more internal, more organic kind of growth. And therefore he went to every one of his direct reports and said, I want you to come forward with at least two very bold, very large, innovative ideas that would transform your business. And that he set forth that expectation that the innovation would occur at all levels and with everyone. And I think all the research that we can see about innovation says that it is something that needs to be embedded in the system, that sometimes organizations unwittingly stifle innovation by the review processes, by the paperwork, by the levels of approval that have been set up to kind of get these things done, and that you can pay attention to some of these barriers inside the organization and help innovation flourish. The bottom line here is that those leaders who were seen as fostering innovation were seen as being very inspirational. Now, maybe that comes from them being willing to kind of give attention to good innovative ideas that come from others. Maybe it comes from them being good at sort of encouraging others and themselves to kind of spot the trends that are happening in the external markets and environment that they're working in. Maybe it's their encouragement of people to go out and visit with customers and to ask customers probing questions. So there are a number of things you can do to, I think, foster innovation. But the bottom line, again, is there's some very powerful connection between innovation and inspiration and motivation. So those are the component parts, as best we can determine, of this thing we know as inspiring and motivating behavior. Which brings us to our third and kind of final question. Why in the world is it so powerful? Why is it? Why does it have such a far-reaching effect in terms of the performance of the organization? here are some thoughts, not necessarily all my own, certainly, but it would seem like number one, it goes a long way to enhancing people's self-esteem. And when there's self-esteem and self-confidence in the organization, things go better. It does give new meaning and purpose to people's work, and so they do feel like they're engaged in work that has some real utility and value, and they feel connected to it. Inspiration does seem to ratchet up the level of cooperation inside the organization. It does encourage people to pursue higher goals. There is a strong body of evidence that says that creativity tends to go way up when people are working with somebody whom they perceive as being inspiring and motivating. It does encourage people to not be risk-averse, to not be timid and frightened about coming up with new ideas and new suggestions and to try new things. In the case of working for an inspiring leader, you know that he or she will be delighted that you did this rather than being upset or being critical. And so therefore the bottom line seems to be that it really does create higher productivity and provides a much stronger identification with the overall organization. These forces then become kind of self-generating, and the subordinates experience more positive emotions. They are happier and more engaged. And these practices strengthen the bond between the leader and the subordinates. Greater trust is created. And finally, as someone observed, they really literally transform the culture into a happier, more positive workplace. And when you have that, then, as is suggested here, people end up working longer, harder, and a lot more efficiently, as well as more happily. So I'm going to stop here for a second and maybe just invite you to put forth some questions. And I'd like to kind of respond to some questions before I just conclude maybe with my final conclusions. So, moderator, can we maybe open the phones here to hearing some questions, and I'd be happy to respond.
Sure, Jack.
Okay.
One of the questions that has come up, I think, is on many of our minds, and that is, in tough times, how does the inspirational leader keep employees inspired and motivated?
Well, I think it's a wonderful question, and I would say that I don't know that we don't have the data that would suggest that there's a different mechanism or a different set of processes or a different set of elements that would inspire people in tough times than you would use in good times. I guess I would answer the question that you didn't ask, however, and that is to say, it surely seems to me that it puts an added, maybe not burden's not the right word, but a huge opportunity for leaders in organizations to recognize that this of all times is the time when they need to be thinking about inspiring and motivating people. When they are worried, they are nervous, they are concerned about their 401k, and they are concerned about losing their job. Boy, what time would be more crying out for the leader to kind of step up and do some of the things that we've just talked about here. That would be my answer.
Okay. Thank you. Now, in the book, The Extraordinary Leader, you wrote that there is a connection between listening and trust. What is that connection between listening and trust?
Between listening and trust?
Yes.
Well, boy, I think trust is a wonderfully complex kind of outcome, and I think listening is one element of it, because I think that when you listen to me, you are sending several very important messages. You're saying, I value your opinion. I'm willing to take the time to try to understand it. And if you say that trust is sort of that combination that says, there's a wonderful formula for this thing called trust that is in a book called The Trusted Leader, and the formula kind of goes something like this: the trust equals reliability times credibility times intimacy, all divided by self-interest. So as you think about this, you say, the fact that you listen to me clearly gives you, in my eyes, a lot more credibility. I know now that you understand what I'm thinking. I believe that you have some real concerns about my point of view and my opinion, that you're wanting to kind of hear the facts, at least as they appear to me. And the fact that you're taking some time with me and that you're willing to address this issue, I guess sort of says that enhances my perceptions of your reliability in my eyes. And certainly maybe the most importantly, when you listen to me, the warmth between the two of us, this thing that was called intimacy, don't take that the wrong way. I mean, it's the warmth, it's the closeness, it's the bond that exists. I think listening drives that very highly. And if you then say that the trust is a combination of those three things, all divided by self-interest, the fact that you're listening to me, the fact that you're wanting to know what I think, tends to have that self-interest score go down, which then means that the outcome of trust tends to go way up. So I think those are the connections between listening and trust. Is there another question?
Yes, thank you for that. And now I'd like to move to a question that we got regarding for-profit business and nonprofit business.
Okay.
My leadership trends between these two types of organizations.
I would have to quickly say that the great bulk of our data comes from private sector for-profit organizations. That while we do have some data from healthcare institutions and some others that would be technically viewed as nonprofit, that we don't have sufficiently large bodies of data to be able to kind of say with any kind of confidence that here's the difference between how people function and the perceptions of people inside these two different kinds of organizations. Now, having said that, I would say to you personally, privately, my experience in working with these organizations is that, yeah, there are some cultural differences and there are some nuances that are a little different, but in the main, the good leadership practices that work inside of a not-for-profit institution seem to me to be exactly the same. Because, I guess, as Peter Drucker said many years ago, increasingly, most organizations are taking on many of the characteristics of a not-for-profit organization. People have more freedom to move, to come and go. Now, maybe this is getting a little bit worse, kind of given our economic downturn. But, I don't personally see that the leadership practices that succeed in the private sector are all that different from the ones that seem to work really well in the not-for-profit sector. That's my.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you see any relationship between a leader being inspiring and his or her personal integrity?
Oh, absolutely. I think this gets back to that sort of issue of The trust is all the elements of trust get divided by what I perceive to be your self-interest. So if I think that you're doing things for your own personal benefit, for your own aggrandizement, for your own agenda, or that you're being less than honest and truthful about what you're telling the rest of us, then trust goes way, way down. And certainly inspiration is very, very much linked to people's feeling of confidence and trust in their leader. So there's no question that just as our research in the Extraordinary Leader showed that the center tentpole was character, it was integrity, it was honesty, it was doing what you said you were going to do. That's very, very much related to your ability to inspire and motivate people. Without it, I think your ability goes, way, way down. Okay.
Okay. Yes, let's shift a little bit. There's so much in the media today about the multi-generations at work. Do you see any specific trends within generations about inspirational leadership, especially with what I'll call the Generation X or those folks in their 30s or so?
Well, I appreciate the question, and I would say to you that we've just completed this research trying to look a little more in depth at what can we understand about inspiration, and we've come up with these kind of, I hope, insights and some useful perspectives. Again, our database is not broken out across these generational kind of strata, so we don't have any kind of data that would allow us to separate out those. So I would be giving you just sort of off the top of my head what I think are some of the differences, and I think you're probably as equally good at doing that as I am. So the answer is we don't have any data that separates out the generations. Indeed, for the great bulk of our 360-degree feedback data, we don't have accurate age data. So we're not really probably even in a position in the near future to be able to answer that question very accurately.
Fair enough. How do we inspire people to learn for innovating, revolutionizing, or transforming the workplace? Do you have any ideas on that?
Well, yeah, I think that again, the same general principles that seem to be at the heart of inspiring behavior in general, I think probably would apply to inspiring people to learn. So, setting stretch goals, providing clear direction about where the organization is going. I think you could see the connection on a lot of those. Certainly one of the powerful ones, and what our own research shows, is that the employees who believe that you as a leader are really concerned about their self-development are the ones who are perceived by their direct reports as practicing self-development for themselves. So the interesting phenomenon is, if I see you reading books, attending seminars, being intellectually curious, and if I see you working on your own personal development, then there appears to be a much higher likelihood that I'll believe that you are concerned about my development. So I think part of it is the example that leaders set, and I think maybe secondly it is that the leaders can help people realize that our future success very much depends upon learning and retaining some of those important kind of learnings that sometimes get lost when people when people retire or leave, and that that learning is now part of the requirement for success in business. That learning and earning and performing are all very much wrapped together, and that we no longer have the luxury of just thinking, well, I got my degree and I can sort of spend the next 10 years exploiting that degree and coasting on what I learned in the past, because things are just changing far too rapidly for that to occur. So I think, again, it's the culture of the organization that says we really value learning, we really reward learning, we really encourage learning, we really take time to sort of stop and reflect on what's gone well, and that we use this kind of action learning process to help enhance everything that we do. And so, inspiring to learn, I think, is not all that different than inspiring in all the other dimensions that we've just talked about.
Okay. So some leaders have a really quiet or analytical type approach. How would you coach an analytical, quiet, or behind-the-scenes leader to step up with some of the more people-oriented characteristics that you've identified in the research?
That's really a very interesting question, because, again, I think the message I'd like to be sure that all the people on the call here today is that you can be inspirational with very differing styles, and you don't have to be the highly extroverted, kind of flamboyant individual to be inspiring. That those other qualities of being a good setter of goals, being a good role model, being concerned about the development of people, about being focused on producing results and so forth. All those things clearly have their role in inspiration. But having said that, there is a strong body of evidence that says the more highly extroverted leader does have an advantage in being more inspirational. He or she is willing to kind of get out of their comfort zone and connect with people and extend their hand and get out of their office and go thank people for what they're doing and inquire about what's going well. And so, to the extent that the less extroverted people can work on becoming a little more outgoing and to do some of those things, they will be more inspirational. That's just the reality of it. And I in some ways wish that weren't so, because I know it's the politically correct thing to kind of say, well, all behavior is okay and there's no value judgments on it. But the truth of the matter is that the research is pretty clear. More extroverted leaders are more inspirational.
Interesting. Well, from a different perspective, this time that of the follower, is it possible that followers can inspire leaders? Can this work?
I certainly think followers can inspire leaders. I think it's not a one-way street by any means, and I think exactly the same things that the leader might do to inspire the people with whom he or she works can also be instilled by a person in the group that doesn't have a formal title or a formal position. We get back to this really interesting concept around emotional contagion. If you have a person in the group who is very enthused, very excited, very willing to kind of take on challenging assignments, does it with a really great attitude and in a good-natured kind of way, that radiates to everybody. And while it's true that the leader has an advantage in that because of his or her role and position, their emotions have even more influence. But I would strongly argue that the research is pretty clear that the individual in the group who approaches it with enthusiasm and excitement and a positive outlook can be very contagious, and therefore that contagion spreads not only to the other team members, but can also very much spread to the boss. Those would be my views. Okay. Are there any other questions? I think I've lost my moderator here.
No,
oh, you're not. Oh,
my
you're
sound
there.
was going in and
Your
out.
sound.
Sorry about
Okay.
that.
All right. Okay.
We have a question here related to basically the science behind all of this, the research.
Okay.
If somebody's a medical student or a medical doctor, then there's science behind that field. But with leadership, it seems to be continually moving, a moving target based on the environment, the organization, the components. How do researchers reconcile this with the study of leadership?
Yeah. Well, I would certainly concur with the observation that a lot of the things that are published in this field of leadership, I would say that a lot of them are based on anecdotes, and they're based on personal beliefs and philosophies with all the best intentions. But I'm reminded of a physician named Dr. David Eddy, who back in 1970 said, as best that he could tell, that probably only 15%, that's 15% of all that physicians were doing at that time had any grounding in any kind of science, and that he single-handedly kind of led a charge to kind of change a lot of medical practices, and has done so. And the good news is that it's now up to 25%. So doesn't that make you feel good? It's gone from 15 to 25. I think that our approach has been to try to be as data-driven, try to look at the empirical evidence that we had and use that as the basis for sort of any prescriptive recommendations that you make, that we've had, just far too many personal opinions and theories, and that it hasn't been based on science. I wish there were better and easier and less expensive kinds of science that would give us the answers that we need. I personally believe that the work of Martin Seligman and the whole positive psychology movement is very well researched, very solid in its in its underpinnings, and so I think we're getting better at this. But I would certainly concur that this discipline, leadership development, will only leap forward when we're willing to be much more rigorous in the kind of research that we do in it. As I personally think about all the stuff that I see getting done in the name of leadership development, which includes, swinging from ropes and going down whitewater rapids and playing Tinker Toy games and all kinds of stuff, I sort of say to myself, okay, what's the data that says that doing this is going to make a positive, permanent difference? And I think if we were to ask ourselves, what's our number? What do we think of all the things that are done in the name of leadership development? What part of them would be based on any kind of science? I'm fearful that our number might be kind of low. So I would, very much support the idea that we should do our best to try to approach this topic with as much empirical rigor as we can. And that's what we've tried to do, as you've seen from what I've said today.
Yes, thank you. So we have time for, I believe, one more question.
Okay.
And that is, what does your research suggest on how to inspire others to conceptualize greater possibilities?
Well, I think it's there around, you know, some of those ideas that had to do with innovation. I think getting people to deliberately kind of think big and to set that expectation and to, you know, not just be content with little baby steps. And my own kind of what I've seen that seems to be very helpful in doing that is for people to get out of their office, get out of the building, go talk to some customers, go watch people use your product, go watch people use your service. That there are things that you can do that kind of get you out of the rut that you so easily kind of can fall into. So those would be my just sort of quick suggestions about what could be done. Would you like me to kind of wind up by just sort of sharing some conclusions that are maybe on the screen here? Would that be useful? Hello, hello. Let me do that just as a way of concluding. My conclusions would be that the big secret is that there is no one big secret, but many, I think, new, useful insights. Maybe the most surprising conclusion surrounds this importance and power of emotion in the whole leadership process. Frankly, both my colleague Joe Folkman and I were really surprised at the power of stretch goals and the fact that was of those 6 behaviors, it was the one that was most statistically significantly correlated with inspires and motivates. We think a good deal of inspiration is a byproduct of just sound leadership practices. There's not gimmicks and tricks. It's just basically good sound leadership, and that again it all starts with the leaders being willing to accept the responsibility of being the leader for the group, and sometimes leaders don't always want to step up to that from our observation. I think the best results come when leaders implement several things at once. That seems to be true. It's much like the laminated beam, that when you glue things together and have them work together, that you get the most powerful results. It is really clear that this inspiring behavior is extremely contagious. Unfortunately, it's not as contagious as the negative, uninspiring behavior, and that's kind of the other big aha here, and that is that the leader who engages in negative, bad behavior is really toxic, and you have to work really hard to overcome the impact of that kind of a negative leader. And just finally, I would say bosses' emotions and behavior, because of the position that they're in, have an exponential effect. So if you think one person coming into a group that's upbeat and positive and creative and innovative has an effect, and then multiply that by the fact that if it's the boss doing it, you get this double compounding kind of effect. So those would be just some concluding comments, and we thank you for all those good questions, and sorry about the little glitches just getting started, but we'll look forward to any feedback that you have, and if you have some questions you want to send to me, you see my email address there to which you can send them. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you, Dr. Zenger. This has been most informative, and we're inspired to think about our own leadership possibilities, I'm sure. So okay. Thank you, everybody, and this concludes our session today. Bye now.